Matthew chapter 15. Then came to Jesus scribes and Pharisees, which were of Jerusalem, saying, Why do thy disciples transgress the tradition of the elders? For they wash not their hands when they eat bread. But he answered and said unto them, Why do ye also transgress the commandment of God by your tradition? For God commanded, saying, Honor thy father and mother, and he that curseth father or mother, let him die the death. But ye say, Whosoever shall say his father or his mother, It is a gift by whatsoever thou mightest be profited by me, and honor not his father or his mother, he shall be free. Thus have ye made the commandment of God of none effect by your tradition. Ye hypocrites, well did Isaiah prophesy of you, saying, This people draweth nigh unto me with their mouth, and honoureth me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. But in vain do they worship me, teaching for doctrines the commandments of men. And he called the multitude and said unto them, Hear and understand. Not that which goeth into the mouth defileth a man, but that which cometh out of the mouth, this defileth a man. Then came his disciples and said unto him, Knowest thou that the Pharisees were offended after they heard this saying? But he answered and said, Every plant which my heavenly Father hath not planted shall be rooted up. Let them alone, they be blind leaders of the blind. And if the blind lead the blind, both shall fall into the ditch. Then answered Peter and said unto him, Declare unto us this parable. And Jesus said, Are ye also yet without understanding? Do not ye yet understand that whatsoever entereth in at the mouth goeth into the belly and is cast out into the draught? But those things which proceedeth out of the mouth come from the heart, and they defile the man. For out of the heart proceedeth evil thoughts, murders, adulteries, fornications, thefts, false witness, blasphemies. These are the things which defile a man. But to eat with unwashen hands defileth not a man. Then Jesus went thence, and departed into the coasts of Tyre and Sidon. And behold, a woman of Canaan came out of the same coasts, and cried unto him, saying, Have mercy on me, O Lord, thou Son of David. My daughter is grievously vexed with the devil. But he answered her not a word. And his disciples came and besought him, saying, Send her away, for she crieth after us. But he answered and said, I am not sent but unto the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Then came she and worshipped him, saying, Lord, help me. But he answered and said, It is not meet to take the children's bread and to cast it to dogs. And she said, Truth, Lord, yet the dogs eat of the crumbs which fall from their master's table. Then Jesus answered and said unto her, O woman, great is thy faith, be it unto thee even as thou wilt. And her daughter was made whole from that very hour. And Jesus departed from thence, and came nigh unto the sea of Galilee, and went up into a mountain, and sat down there. And great multitudes came unto him, having with them those that were lame, blind, dumb, maimed, and many others, and cast them down at Jesus' feet, and he healed them. Insomuch that the multitude wondered when they saw the dumb to speak, the maimed to be whole, the lame to walk, and the blind to see, and they glorified the God of Israel. Then Jesus called his disciples unto him, and said, I have compassion on the multitude, because they continue with me now 3 days, and have nothing to eat, and I will not send them away fasting, lest they faint in the way. And his disciples say unto him, Whence should we have so much bread in the wilderness, as to fill so great a multitude? And Jesus saith unto them, How many loaves have ye? And they said, 7, and a few little fishes. And he commanded the multitude to sit down on the ground. And he took the 7 loaves and the fishes, and gave thanks, and brake them, and gave to his disciples, and the disciples to the multitude. And they did all eat, and were filled, and they took up of the broken meat that was left 7 baskets full. And they that did eat were 4,000 men, besides women and children. And he sent away the multitude, and took ship, and came into the coasts of Magdala. Matthew chapter 15 begins with the Pharisees and the Sadducees coming up and trying to shame Jesus and the people that Jesus was with for not following one of their traditions. And their tradition was something to do with washing hands before eating bread. And hand washing, it is a big symbol, and I've seen it before brought up within the context of evil people being really into washing their hands, or maybe forcing other people to wash their hands. And I guess it even kind of reminds me of Macbeth, with Lady Macbeth with her bloody hands or whatever. And so the Pharisees and the Sadducees try to shame Jesus for not following this made-up rule that they had. And this is a common theme, that these people would make up all sorts of rituals, and a lot of them cleansing rituals. And that's also kind of a meme, these people being like germaphobes and thinking that that makes them holy. That's one thing worth mentioning. The whole... when people say cleanliness is next to godliness, that didn't come from the Bible. And it just shows you one of those corruptions of these types of people, who they think because they wash their hands in a certain way, or they have a certain process for their water vessels, that they're holier than other people. So Jesus burns them, basically, which happens a lot. And he mentions something that I don't 100% understand exactly, but he's mentioning, I think, some sort of tradition or some sort of saying that these people followed or had, and saying that it directly contradicts one of the 10 Commandments. And it's actually interesting. I see this a lot. This is almost like you could call a conspiracy against King James Version of the Bible. A lot of times, I don't even know how. Well, so here's another conspiracy. I don't know how. If you ever look up Bible verses, Google will almost always try to force you into some other version, usually the NIV, non-inspired version. So related to that, I don't know, out of nowhere, I always use KJV, King James Version. And I will say right now, I don't care when people try to say, oh, King James was amazing. None of us know that King James was a real person. I know when I read this version of the Bible that it reads the best, it feels the most real to me, and it's beautifully written. And so I think anybody who talks against it you should be wary of listening to anybody that talks against KJV. Anyways, here, it's just interesting. My Bible app, for no reason, started doing a different version of the Bible instead of KJV. It's never done that before. And it changed the word. When Jesus gives Isaiah prophecy, in the King James Version, it says commandments, which is very important here. The fact that the Isaiah prophecy says commandments of men, when it was flipped to another version of the Bible, it said precepts of men, which is, they do this all the time. One of the biggest complaints that people have against King James Version, which is totally unfounded, is they say that it's hard to read, which I always just say, I personally think it's easier to read than something like Shakespeare. And they force you to read Shakespeare in school, so we all go to school. Why can't we read King James? And so that's just something that I see that happens all the time, where they'll take a word like commandments and change it into precepts. How is that making it any easier to read? A lot of times they take something from King James Version that's totally easy to read and understand, like commandments. Not only is that an easy to understand word, commandments, they're not changing a crazy hard to understand word. The word commandment has extra meaning, and when they change the word, you miss that meaning. The whole point is that these people came up and tried to shame Jesus for not washing his hands, for not following one of the traditions. And he comes back and says, you're getting mad at me for not following one of your traditions that has nothing to do with God's law. And your people, he's calling out their entire people for having a tradition that directly contradicts one of the laws of God. So it's a huge deal. And that gets totally lost if you're reading a version that says precepts of men instead of commandments of men. It's an extra layer of what Jesus is scolding these people for is actually a commandment And they're doing Isaiah prophecy stuff where commandments of men over God. Okay, so that was already a bit of a ramble, but so what it is, I don't know what it is. So the tradition that he's exposing them for, I don't know exactly. It has something to do with where it says, "Wherewith thou mightest have been profited by me is given to God." I guess it's just worth saying. I've already talked about it enough. May as well say one last thing about it. My only guess is that they had some sort of saying where people could say, anything good that happens to me is good for my parents because it glorifies God. I could just see the people back then having some sort of BS saying or tradition like that, like, oh, anything that's good that happens to me honors my mother and my father. I don't know. That's just a guess. You can let me know in the comments. I guess it's worth putting in here a story time, just because it reminded me of this, because maybe it's relevant. I don't know. Just this whole having a tradition that people try to come off as it glorifying God, it actually could be undermining things. And so what it reminded me of was a wedding that I recently went to, and these people were, I guess, religious, and the groom's vows, and I guess we heard after the fact that the groom was really proud of his vows that were just so amazing, and which adds an extra layer of irony to the whole situation. But anyways, the vows were probably the most awkward vows I've ever heard in my life, because what this guy did, and you could tell that he thought that he was slick, which makes it even more cringy that afterwards he was bragging about how good they were, the vows. He used the opportunity of his vows to basically talk about how he can't really do anything for his wife, or can't do, yeah, I mean, that was basically it, that he can't promise or do anything for his wife because God comes first to him. And it was just so weird, because it came off really cringy, and like the whole point of your vows is that's a time, I mean, you can bring God into it and you can thank God for sending you the perfect wife, but do you just see how the problem is that he took this opportunity that was supposed to be, and you can make it about God, and you can thank God for bringing you the perfect woman, but the fact that he basically was like nagging his wife to try to make himself look so holy, that just the whole situation was so cringy. And I think that's kind of what Jesus is maybe mentioning here, just how he might see himself as glorifying God in that way, but he's actually just being a bad person in general. So maybe that's the idea that's happening here, because I could see that groom saying that he was respecting his wife by respecting God or something, and that's just what I get reminded of by the people saying whatever goes to, I don't know. That's enough rambling. On to the next one. This chapter mentions the blind leading the blind, and has a really interesting interaction of Jesus and a woman who he calls the woman a dog, basically. And situations like that are always just, it catches you off guard the first time, but then I don't really question stuff like that anymore. One thing, Jesus just could have known that this woman would have reacted the way that she did, and thereby glorifying God. That could be one explanation. And yeah, it's just an interesting thing when Jesus does something that makes you take a step back. I wonder why he was acting like that. And I think a lot of times there's things that we don't notice. Usually it's the opposite, I'd say. Usually today, I'd say we read over stuff and it's supposed to be a big deal, but today we just don't notice that, how shocking it would have been in the time. So it's just interesting to see stuff that's still very shocking today. Why would Jesus call a woman a dog? Well, maybe it's because he knew what her reaction would be and that she could glorify God that way. In this chapter, Jesus feeds the multitudes again, and I referenced it in the previous video. And it's actually interesting, in the next chapter, Matthew chapter 16, Jesus actually does what I mentioned in my last video, where Jesus finally goes, why do you guys keep getting so surprised when I keep doing these things? Like, I can feed the multitudes with a few fish more than one time, and you're still surprised by it. And yep, it's just something worth noticing, something that I noticed, that you can be in the middle of it and you can be seeing it all go down, and you can still get surprised by it the second time and the third time. All right, I hope you enjoyed the video. God bless everyone.